Hi, and welcome to today's current news. Today is Wednesday, May 1st, 2024. Today we will be listening to BBC, Crackdown or Compromise, a tale of two U.S. campus protests. AP, a massive Powerball win draws attention to a little-known immigrant culture in the U.S. NPR, mammograms should start at age 40, new guidelines recommend. And NPR, wages, employment, inflation are up, causing headaches for the Fed. Crackdown or Compromise, a tale of two U.S. campus protests. The police arrived in force at dawn on Saturday with orders to clear infiltrators from the Gaza war protest camp at Northeastern University in Boston. Within an hour, more than 100 people were under arrest, students and non-students alike, and many of their tents flattened or removed. A large counter-protest then formed, as officers from the state police in tactical gear hauled off their suspects. The scene was one of confrontation and chaos. Northeastern campus administrators said they were compelled to call police as infiltration by outsiders led to a clear escalation in tensions, and that an anti-Semitic slur had been heard, something the protesters deny. As the campus protests stretch into a second week across the U.S., Northeastern is among many colleges who have now taken the decision to crack down hard and refused calls to divest from companies involved in Israel's military. Columbia in New York squashed the very first camp, blanked protester demands, and then threatened suspensions to anyone taking part. The student response has been escalation, and on Tuesday, dozens occupied and damaged a university building, leading to officials threatening expulsions. Other colleges, however, have shown that confrontation, chaos, and escalation can be avoided. The story at Northwestern University, just outside of Chicago, is entirely different to that of Northeastern. Its protest camp appeared on Thursday morning. University administrators responded by banning tents and calling in campus police. They stopped short of calling the state police, and no arrests were made, and the campus officers eventually left. On Monday, administrators announced a deal. Protesters were to be allowed to stay until the end of classes on June 1st. If they remove tents and limit those taking part in students and others affiliated with the university. They stopped short of agreeing to stop investments in Israeli companies and arms manufacturers, but agreed to restart an investment committee and increase transparency over its approximately $13.7 billion endowment. Northwestern also promised to fund places for 2 Palestinian faculty members and 5 Palestinian students. A truce appears to be holding, at least for now. Northwestern and Northeastern are both private colleges, and both in left-leaning liberal states. So why were the responses to essentially the same situation and demands so different? Lauren Loss-Shepard, a historian at the University of New Orleans, said the pro-Palestinian protests have not reached the fever pitch or level of violence seen during anti-war demonstrations in the 1960s and 70s, where some students were calling for the overthrow of the U.S. government. She said that in some cases, however, calling in outside police forces had dramatically raised the stakes. Nearly all American universities have campus police, who are full-time, uniformed, and can make arrests, she said. Calling in municipal police or National Guard troops is a high-risk strategy. Scenes of police clashing with protesters have been splashed across social media, and observers can also get caught up in camp shutdowns. At Emory University in Atlanta, professors were among those arrested by city and state police last week, including Noel McAfee, chair of the university's philosophy department. Ms. McAfee told the BBC that she was observing what she described as a peaceful protest when the police started to move in and the protesters began to move. She began filming police hitting a protester, she said, and noticed chemical irritants in the air. It was really disturbing. I started yelling, "Stop it," and I was trying to take a video. One of the cops stood up and told me I need to step away. I froze in place. She was then arrested.
Yes. I just saw police use unnecessary violence for peaceful protesters. I saw police knock students to the ground. Clearly, you see a bunch of arrests going on.
Hundreds of other arrests have been reported at universities all around the country, even as other disputes have been resolved without law enforcement. On Tuesday, protesters and administrators reached an agreement at Brown University, similar to Northwestern's, which promised to hold a vote on divestment from weapons manufacturers in the autumn. And a camp at University of California, Berkeley, an epicenter of the 1960s protest movement, has been both largely peaceful and left alone. Political pressure. Ken Paulson, director of the Free Speech Center at Middle Tennessee State University, said that political pressure, including from high-ranking members of Congress, had forced some administrators into potentially risky moves that in some cases have backfired. Increasingly, college presidents are trying to show Congress and the world that they are tough enough to be college presidents, he said. And it is so reminiscent of the late 60s, with lawmakers threatening college presidents and insisting that they cannot coddle anti-war student protesters. The pressure can be more acute on leaders at private universities, he said, because publicly funded universities are obliged to provide students First Amendment protections. At private schools, they don't necessarily have to offer free speech rights, Mr. Paulson said, so they can't tell legislators that their hands are tied and they can't do anything. They have to navigate these protests strictly with their own policies. Time may be on the side of campus administrators. Mr. Paulson said that most students are no part of the protest and are simply trying to get through the year. Although graduation ceremonies could provide another protest target, some universities have already canceled commencement ceremonies or are considering doing so. If history has any guidance to Laura Shepard, we are going to have an intense next week or two until the spring semester ends. A massive Powerball win draws attention to a little-known immigrant culture in the U.S.
I'm excited to announce that we have 3 winners of the $1.3 billion jackpot. Our first winner is Chang, known as Charlie Saifan, and his wife, Duan Pen Saifan. They're both from Portland, and their friend, Liza Chang, who is from Milwaukee.
I've been battling with cancer for 8 years now. Currently, I'm still having chemotherapy. And I'm thankful for lottery and how I have been blessed with this prize. I will be able to provide for my family and my health. I found out that I won, so with my partner, and I called her. She's on driving on the way to work, and I told her, where you go? What are you doing now? She said, I'm driving on the way to work. And I told her, you don't have to go work now.
Since 1840.
Chang Charlie Saifan wore a broad smile and a bright blue sash emblazoned with the words Lo Mein USA as he hosted an oversized check for $1.3 billion above his head. The 46-year-old immigrant's luck in winning an enormous Powerball jackpot in Oregon earlier this month, a lump sum payment of $422 million after taxes, which he and his wife will split with a friend, has changed his life. It also raised awareness about Lu Mein people, a Southeast Asian ethnic group with origins in China, many of whose members fled from Laos to Thailand and then settled in the U.S. following the Vietnam War. I was born in Laos, but I am not Laotian, Saifan told a news conference Monday at Oregon Lottery headquarters, where his identity as one of the jackpot winners was revealed. I am Lu Mein. During the Vietnam War, the CIA and U.S. military recruited Lumain in neighboring Laos, many of them subsistence farmers, to engage in guerrilla warfare and to provide intelligence and surveillance to disrupt the Ho Chi Minh Trail that the North Vietnamese used to send troops and weapons through Laos and Cambodia into South Vietnam. After the conflict, as well as the Laotian Civil War, when the U.S.-backed government of Laos fell in 1975, they fled by the thousands to avoid reprisals from the new communist government, escaping by foot through the jungle and then across the Mekong River into Thailand. According to a history posted on the website of Lumain Community Services in Sacramento, California, more than 70% of the Lumain population in Laos left, and many wound up in refugee camps in Thailand. Thousands of the refugees were allowed to come into the U.S., with the first waves arriving in the late 1970s, and most settling along the West Coast. The culture had rich traditions of storytelling, basketry, embroidery, and jewelry making, but many initially had difficulty adjusting to Western life due to cultural and language differences, as well as lack of formal education. There are new tens of thousands of Lumain, pronounced you, me, and in the U.S., with many attending universities or starting businesses. Many have converted to Christianity from traditional animist religions. There is a sizable Yumian community in Portland and its suburbs, with a Buddhist temple and a Baptist church, active social organization, and businesses and restaurants. Kyle Tern, president of the Humane Association of Oregon, arrived in Portland with his family in 1980 when he was 3 years old. He is now running for city council. His father and uncle assisted American forces in Laos, and he was born as his mother fled to a refugee camp in Thailand. Many men in the U.S. have similar stories, but Siphon's Powerball win sheds light on the new lives they have made in Oregon, and somewhere after such trauma, he said. Tern knows all three of the Powerball winners, he says. I think for me it's more than just about the money. We've been here since the late 70s, but very little is known of us, he said as he ate a meal at his uncle's restaurant in Troutdale, a Portland suburb. This attention that we're getting, people are interested in what the community is, who we are, and where we came from. That is, to me, is equally special. Safin, 46, said he was born in Laos and moved to Thailand in 1987, before immigrating to the U.S. in 1994. He graduated from high school in 1996 and has lived in Portland for 30 years. He worked as a machinist for an aerospace company. He said Monday that he has had cancer for 8 years and had his latest chemotherapy treatment last week. I will be able to provide for my family and my health, he said, adding that he'd find a good doctor for myself. Siphon, who has 2 young children, said that as a cancer patient, he wondered, how am I going to have time to spend all of this money? How long will I live? He said he and his 37-year-old wife, Down Pen, are taking half the money and the rest is going to a friend, Lizo Chow, 55, of the Portland suburb of Milwaukee. Chow had chipped in $100 to buy a batch of tickets with them. Chow was on her way to work when Safin called her with the news. You don't have to go anymore, he said. In the weeks leading up to the drawing, he wrote out numbers for the game on a piece of paper and slept with it under his pillow, he said. He prayed that he would win, saying, I need some help. I don't want to die yet unless I have done something for my family first. The winning Powerball ticket was sold in early April at a Plaid Pantry convenience store in Portland, ending a winless streak that stretched more than 3 months. The Oregon Lottery said it had to go through a security and vetting process before announcing the identity of the person who came forward to claim the prize. Under Oregon law, with few exceptions, lottery players cannot remain anonymous. Winners have a year to claim the top prize. The jackpot had a cash value of $621 million before taxes if the winner chose to take a lump sum rather than an annuity paid over 30 years, with an immediate payout followed by 29 annual installments. The prize is subject to federal taxes and state taxes in Oregon. The $1.3 billion prize is the fourth largest Powerball jackpot in history, and the eighth largest among U.S. jackpot games, according to the Oregon Lottery. The biggest U.S. lottery jackpot won was $2.04 billion in California in 2022. Mammograms should start at age 40. New guidelines recommend. Breast cancer is very treatable when caught early, and mammograms, which are X-ray images of breasts, are a reliable screening test to detect it. Now, final guidelines released Tuesday from the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force urge all women to get screened every other year, starting at age 40. The new recommendation applies to all people assigned female at birth who are at average risk of breast cancer. The recommendation is based on a review of new evidence by an independent panel of experts at the task force. Until now, women in their 40s have been encouraged to have a conversation with their health provider about when to start mammograms based on their personal risks. The task force's previous recommendation was for women to start mammograms at 50, and for women ages 40 to 49 to consider it, depending on personal risk. The evidence has shifted in support of recommending mammograms for all women at 40, says Dr. Carol Mangione, an internal medicine specialist at UCLA who served as a previous chair of the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force and is a co-author of the new recommendation. New and more inclusive science about breast cancer in women younger than the age of 50 has allowed us to expand our prior recommendation. Mangione points to the rise in breast cancer among people in their 40s. There are a lot more women getting breast cancer, and that influences our recommendation, she says. The task force recommendations are considered the gold standard because they're based on a thorough review of evidence by an independent group of experts. Many doctors follow the task force guidelines. The Affordable Care Act requires most private health insurers to cover annual mammograms with no cost sharing, making them free to patients. Breast cancer is the second leading cause of cancer death among women. About 42,000 women and 500 men die from the disease each year, according to the CDC. If all women followed our new recommendation, we could reduce mortality from breast cancer in the U.S. by about 20%, says Mangione, saving about 8,000 lives a year. That's a big reduction in mortality from breast cancer, she says. Black women are 40% more likely to die from breast cancer, so the new recommendation is incredibly important to address this disparity. Mangione says starting at 40 actually creates the most benefit for Black women in our country, she says. When someone is diagnosed with breast cancer, there are many interactions with the healthcare system, from screening to biopsy to treatment. Because of structural racism and health equity problems, there's probably a step off at every single part of the pathway for a Black woman, Mangione says. The cumulative effect is they end up with higher mortality. In order to address this health disparity, the task force is urgently calling for more research. Women with a family history or genetic risk factors who are at high risk of breast cancer may start screening before age 40, and there are separate screening recommendations for women at high risk. But for women at average risk, there's previously been debate about what age to begin and how often. Mangione says the task force looked hard to see if annual screening would save more lives than biannual screening. For now, we found that every other year was the optimal strategy, she says, though she says more evidence is needed. Believe it or not, there's never been a clinical trial in the U.S. that has compared annual to biannual with our current technology and treatments, Mangione says. This is a big evidence gap. The task force also calls for more research to better understand whether people with dense breasts, which can make breast cancer more difficult to detect, could benefit from additional screening such as a breast ultrasound or MRI. Several medical groups have breast cancer screening recommendations. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists recommend that women at average risk of breast cancer should get a mammogram every 1 to 2 years, beginning at age 40. So the new recommendation from the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force brings the screening recommendations into alignment. We're seeing a consensus, Mangione says, that starting at 40 and having mammograms every other year can be beneficial. Wages, employment, inflation are up, causing headaches for the Fed. The Federal Reserve has promised to be data-driven in deciding when to cut interest rates. but some of the recent economic data has the central bank driving in circles. Economic growth is slowing, but hiring appears to be picking up. Cars are getting cheaper, but auto insurance is more expensive. Inflation is lower than it was a year ago, but higher than it was last month. As they try to sift through sometimes contradictory economic signals, Fed policymakers are likely to stick with their own go slow approach, leaving interest rates unchanged this week and possibly for months to come. If you want to join the kennel of data dogs, what's the first rule of the kennel? Chicago Fed President Austin Cousby said recently, "If you are unclear, stop walking and start sniffing. And with these numbers, we need to do more sniffing." 23-year high interest rates through summer. Inflation fell sharply in the second half of last year, leading some to believe the Fed would soon be ready to take its foot off the brake and start cutting interest rates. But the progress on prices has since slowed, and Fed watchers now expect the Fed to keep its benchmark interest rate at a 23-year high, at least through the summer. "I think we need to recalibrate, Coolsby says. "It doesn't look like it's going to be as rapid as it looked for the previous 6 or 7 months. The mystery is economic strength, not economic weakness." Inflation numbers released by the Commerce Department last week showed prices climbing 2.7% during the 12 months ending in March, the biggest annual increase in 4 months. Former White House economist Ernie Tedeschi says he's not worried that inflation is picking up steam, but he agrees with Coolsby that it's no longer cooling. "I think it's clear at this point that the progress that we've made lowering inflation toward the Fed's 2% target has stalled," says Tedeschi, who's now director of economics at the Yale Budget Lab. "This is a good challenge for the Fed, although certainly a challenge that what's underpinning the Fed's concern and mystery is economic strength, not economic weakness." The job market remains strong, with unemployment under 4%. And while the economy grew more slowly in the first 3 months of the year than forecasters expected, consumer spending is still robust. Spending continues to increase. Higher interest rates have cut into spending on big-ticket items, but spending on services continues to increase. You typically take out a loan for when you make big good purchases, like a car, certainly a house, Tedeschi says. Services spending is generally less interest rate sensitive. So while the Fed can influence demand for cars and houses by adjusting interest rate, its ability to tamp down demand for restaurant meals or concert tickets is more limited. "We have one tool, basically," Coolsby said, referring to interest rate. "If you ask the question, how interest rate sensitive are elective plastic surgeries, I have no idea. So we're trying to match our tools to the moment, and that's not totally straightforward." What's more, many Americans are largely insulated from the Fed's high interest rates. If they don't carry a balance on their credit card and they locked in a low fixed interest rate on their mortgage, that's one of the reasons why the consumer remains fairly willing to go out to restaurants and go to the mall, says Oren Klatchkin, financial market economist at Nationwide. They're not feeling that pain of the high rate environment. Of course, that means that inflation is not going to come down as fast, but that's kind of the trade-off that we're in right now. Job market still strong, wages increasing. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell has said the central bank can afford to be patient in battling inflation. Since high interest rates have so far not hurt the job market, U.S. employers added an average of 276,000 jobs a month in January, February, and March, up to 212,000 jobs on average in the 3 previous months. April jobs numbers will be released on Friday. Employers' costs for labor rose 4.2% in the 12 months ending in March, according to figures released Monday by the Labor Department. While raising wages could be more upward pressure on prices, there's also a big reason that people keep spending money. They have jobs. Their wages are increasing, Klatchkin says. It's not to say there are not risks. We're seeing credit card delinquencies increase. The savings rate is quite low. This leaves them fairly exposed if and when the labor market does soften. But until that happens, the consumer is going to remain in a spending mood. Thank you for joining me today.